It was a large place and, admittedly, impressive. For some inexplicable reason, the modern exterior concealed an interior designed in the style of an old baronial castle, like the luxurious sets sometimes seen in movies. Essentially, it was a Victorian interpretation of the ideal medieval castle. After all, in the good old days, there was no technology to build such large and extravagant buildings. One thing I knew for sure, the wedding would not have taken place in such a place if I had been paying for it. But my ex-wife Shona had taken care of that many years ago. I thought I had found a safe haven in a pseudo-minstrel gallery that served as both a tower for spotlights and a projection room, from where I could watch the ceremony, but no one in the hall below could see me. I understood very well that my presence, if it became known, would cause, to put it mildly, controversy and most likely lead to an unpleasant confrontation between me and my former relatives. Besides, I was sure that my daughter would not be thrilled if that happened. I even assumed that Tamsin would be even less pleased to learn of my presence than Witch and George, her husband. In any case, I sat in silence, hiding in the back of the minstrel gallery, from where I could watch the wedding of my estranged daughter, when suddenly someone whispered directly into my ear. "Hello, handsome. I thought you wouldn't miss this little celebration." To say that this voice made me jump is an understatement. I literally jumped up from the fisherman's stool I was sitting on and collapsed to the floor. Well, if I had been sitting on that little stool watching the ceremony through the balustrade, I would have thought there was less chance of anyone noticing me. The loud thud made by the small aluminum stool as it fell onto the stone floor of the minstrel gallery and rolled across it had to be seen to be believed. I realized that any chance of keeping my presence a secret had vanished in an instant. From my new position, lying on my back on the floor, I raised my head and saw trouble towering over me. My daughter's aunt, looking very embarrassed, was desperately gesturing toward the hall below. Megan, or Trouble, as I had jokingly nicknamed her in my youth, was, or rather had been, my ex-wife's mischievous younger sister. Megan had often been the bane of our courtship. Peering through the bars of the balustrade, I realized that my hiding place had suddenly become the center of attention for almost everyone in the building. The bride, groom, priest, photographer, choir, cameraman, and most of the congregation were looking at Megan with annoyed and/or somewhat puzzled expressions on their faces. I pressed myself against the floor as hard as I could and prayed that no one would notice me. Then Megan, signaling that the ceremony was continuing, picked up my little stool and carefully lowered herself onto it with her cute little belly. From my position, I could no longer see the floor of the main hall, but I could almost hear what was happening below, and soon realized that the wedding ceremony had resumed. I hoped that this incident would be chalked up to one of Megan's jokes. Megan's penchant for unusual behavior and surprises was legendary in our family, even when she was a child. "It's okay, you can look now," Megan whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, Billy." "You scared me, girl. I almost had a heart attack." "Where did you learn to sneak up like that, Megan?" I whispered, trying to see what was going on downstairs. It became clear to me that I had temporarily lost my little stool. "Oh, I learned that as a kid, sneaking up on a couple of lovers I knew." She looked down and winked at me. "You're a cheeky little monkey." "I'm not so little anymore, Billy boy. Just watch your step or you'll get raped." "Oh no, they won't, Megan. I'm catching the 4:30 train and getting the hell out of this bloody hole." Megan looked at me again. She made a strange but strangely familiar gesture, with her eyes that I thought meant, "That's what you think." Then she waved her hand toward the platform below. That was her way of telling me that the conversation was over, until the ceremony was over. I always liked Shona's younger sister. Yes, she could be a real pain in the ass when Shona and I were babysitting her. But Shona was always less tolerant of Betta's antics than I was. Megan always seemed like a sweet girl who needed attention. There was a 4-year age gap between the sisters, a recipe for endless arguments. I always thought Megan just didn't understand that her older sister and I needed some space from time to time. The ceremony ended, and I tried my best to catch a glimpse of the groom as he led Tamsin out of the hall. Of course it wasn't easy, considering I didn't want to be noticed. From what I could tell, the guy seemed like a decent enough person. Fortunately, everyone was so focused on the bride and groom that I don't think anyone even glanced at the minstrel gallery. But as soon as the procession was out of sight, Megan started pulling me to my feet. "Come on, Billy. We'd better go down to the dining room." I resisted, yanking Megan's arm fiercely, trying to remain unnoticed until all the guests had left the hall. "There's no way Megan is going to show up at this party. My God, I'll go to jail." Don't be silly, Billy. It's your daughter's wedding. Why would the police arrest you? Well, for starters, because of that damn restraining order, I muttered. No, Billy. Shauna's dead, and she's the only person named in the restraining order. When he killed her, the order was immediately lifted. What do you mean he killed her? I asked, almost jumping to my feet. It was an accident, right? Billy, that damn moron always drove like a goddamn idiot. He still does. That weirdo. Every time he gets behind the wheel, he gets into an accident. Do you have any idea how fast he was going that day? I don't know much about it, Megan. I saw the skid marks on the road, Billy. He was driving like a bloodthirsty idiot that night, just like always. I just can't understand why he hasn't been charged with my sister's murder yet. Even Tamsin knows who's responsible for her mother's death. You probably noticed he wasn't here today. He wasn't invited. Me neither, Megan. Yes, he was. In a way, I just couldn't find you to tell you about it. Look, my invitation says Miss Megan Stone and guest. No reservations or anything. Guess who my guest is going to be? I laughed out loud. You're kidding, Megan. I'm going to Stone's wedding? I was there once before, remember my girlfriend? And you remember how that ended. The fact that my sister was a stupid cow has nothing to do with it, Billy. You're Tamsin's father, and God, you should have been there today, giving her away, not her grandfather. Now, you and I are going to the reception together, and I don't want to hear any nonsense about a restraining order. My Uncle Albert assured me that there is no legal reason why you can't attend the reception as my guest. In fact, he thinks it's a damn good idea. He's always been on your side, you know, even when things were going badly. And here I was wondering why that old bastard wasn't representing Shauna, I commented. Listen, Billy, if my Uncle Albert thought he could get away with it, I'm damn sure he'd represent you for free. He was completely unimpressed with my sister's behavior at the time and took a very hard line with her, my mom, and my dad. He flat out refused to represent Shauna. As far as I know, he and my mom haven't spoken a word to each other since. The only time I saw them together in the same room was at Shauna's funeral. I think Uncle Albert was a little disappointed that you didn't come that day. I wasn't even in the country, Megan. I was helping a group that was photographing the flora and fauna of South Georgia. Since these people were there during the Argentine invasion, they preferred that we stay on the ship if possible. In any case, I didn't know anything about the accident with Shona until 3 months after her funeral, when we returned to the UK. There, in Falmouth, I met Toby, as he was known there, and he told me about the accident. While I was listening to his explanation, Megan pulled me to my feet and began dusting off my whistle. No, that's my suit. God, what is wrong with some people, I ask you? Come on, Billy, Megan continued. Let's go down to the reception desk before the line for admission dissipates. From the way Megan squeezed my hand tightly, I knew that, whether I liked it or not, Megan had decided that I was going to her daughter's wedding. Against my better judgment, I admitted defeat. I had to admit that it was probably just the significant amount of alcohol I had consumed over the past 24 hours. It had clouded my mind to such an extent that I gave in to Megan's wishes. Yes, listen, let me explain. When Shauna and I first, broke up, I have to admit that I didn't behave as well as I could have. As a result, I ended up spending more than a day in American custody, or at least in local law enforcement custody, when I decided to get a little revenge. I made a bit of a fool of the new man in Shona's life. Perhaps it was a frivolous and somewhat amusing endeavor. But in the end, it turned out to be very misguided. The conflict didn't end the way I expected, and I ended up getting a good beating. Unfortunately, Shona somehow got dragged into the story, and she ended up having to go to the nearest emergency room, as Americans like to call hospitals. Hence my detention and numerous court orders issued in both the US and the UK, prohibiting me from approaching Shauna's whereabouts within a mile, on a permanent or almost permanent basis. Be that as it may, I can assure the reader that I personally never laid a hand on my unfaithful wife. Not once, to my knowledge. I am sure the statement will become clearer to you later. Where was I? Oh yes. In any case, after the trial, I became an ex-convict, as Americans like to call us, and was branded a thug and a misogynist. And after the fight, I was unceremoniously stripped of my parental rights to our daughter Tamsin. Incidentally, almost all of this happened while I was still in an American prison. I assure you, it was not pleasant. In fact, there was nothing pleasant about that period of my life. The label of ex-convict did not help my career either. Try getting a work visa in the US with that kind of past. However, none of this prevented Shauna, with the help of the British court system, from demanding that I financially support Tamsin until she turned 18. I'm not particularly proud to admit that after the system kicked me so impressively in the ass, I turned to drink for a while. However, I managed not to turn into a complete slacker or a hardcore alcoholic. But that was probably due to hereditary biological factors rather than any mental impulses, if you know what I mean. Nevertheless, I still needed something to help me face each new day as best I could. Are you still working in the film industry, Billy? Megan asked, leading me, somewhat uncertainly, we were moving slowly, up the stairs to the main lobby of the hall. No, not exactly, Megan, I replied. You could say I'm working in transportation now. Most of the time I work as a sailor on research vessels and the like, although I do take on some freelance work. I think it's convenient for them to have a backup or second experienced cameraman on board to help document what's going on. Sometimes I'm the only cameraman on board. So you quit Hollywood? Megan, I never worked for the big studios. The most I could do was be a second cameraman, and that was on pretty mediocre third-rate films. Unfortunately for me, my wife had much more success with directors and producers than I did. Shona always wanted to be a star, Billy. You knew that before you married her. Yes, but I didn't realize how far she would go to make her dream come true. Damn, look at this pile. We found ourselves in the lobby of the hotel, which we had to walk through to get to the hall where Tamsin's wedding reception was being held. The huge hall was filled with guests patiently waiting their turn for the official reception. I realized that the witch, Megan and Shauna's mother, Warziro, had planned this whole spectacle and organized everything. The witch suffers from megalomania even more than my ex-wife. She planned and organized our weddings, although they weren't as grand as this celebration. I should add that the witch and I were never fans of each other, so I figured my appearance at this reception could turn out to be a disaster. Being anonymous in the crowd didn't make me feel so vulnerable, defenseless. Although several of our guests' relatives quickly joined the conversation when they recognized me, probably from Shauna's wedding and my own a few years ago. I also knew I had a few allies, but they were a closely knit group. The Stones were actually quite a tight-knit clan. Eventually, the crowd began to thin out, and the witch finally noticed me from where she was standing, a little way back from the greeting line. Her face flushed instantly, and for a moment I thought smoke was coming out of her ears. Despite my protests, Megan dragged me through the entrance to the conference hall and toward the greeting line. Tamsin's new husband froze for a moment when Megan introduced him to her father's fiancée. The poor guy didn't know what to do or say. I shook his very weak hand. Tamsin was just as stunned, if not more so. When I looked into her eyes, they grew larger and larger, and I was afraid they were about to pop out of their sockets. You know, I really think that guy had no idea who I was until he heard Aunt Megan tell her new husband that I was Tamsin's father. For some inexplicable reason, I decided to say, "Hey baby, it's been a long time since I held you." Then I took her outstretched hand and kissed the back of it. Yes, I thought about hugging Tamsin, but I was afraid she might faint if I did. Tamsin's response was reduced to b b b b b b b b b b b b but until Megan nudged me with her elbow. The next person to catch my eye was Witch's friend George. He recognized me and handled the situation quite well. At least, that's how it seemed to me. William, we don't… well, this is a surprise. How did you… Billy is my father. He's visiting. If he leaves, I'm leaving with him, Megan ordered, sitting down next to me. I wondered if Megan had spoken to Tamsin. It seemed like there hadn't been time for that. I wouldn't have thought of that, Megan. The old woman replied, "Of course, William is at home. I was just surprised to see him in the village. Your mother assured me that he was working somewhere on the other side of the world." "I was working in Antarctica, sir. I don't know why I called that bastard sir. Probably out of habit." "My ship docked in New Zealand 5 weeks ago," I told the old man. "You see, Megan, your mother tried to contact William. You got her message, I presume, William. Your mother told you she would contact William, Megan. You are a very welcome guest here today, my boy." As he said this, George shifted his gaze from me to Megan. Whatever he said, I was sure there was no message. In this age of modern electronic communication, everything works pretty well. Only occasionally is it interrupted by extremely bad weather on the Bass Coast. Therefore, despite the old man's assurances to the contrary, I was sure that I had never been included on the guest list, even conditionally. I was convinced by the fact that my ex-mother-in-law had disappeared from the list of people waiting when we arrived at her house. I even wondered if she had run to the police or something. Tamsin's new relatives were polite, pleasant, and clearly very embarrassed. They didn't look like they had seen a ghost. Rather, they were shocked to find themselves in a situation where they had to shake hands with one of them. From my point of view, it was all quite amusing, but I was curious to know what exactly they had been told about Tamsin's father. Most of the other guests had no idea who I was and looked at us with curiosity, probably trying to figure out why Megan had decided to watch the wedding ceremony from the balcony. As we left the hall, like everyone else, I took a glass of champagne from a passing waitress and drank it in one gulp. Megan clearly signaled me to take my time when I took a second glass. Then the imposing figure of Sir Albert Stone emerged from the crowd. I was surprised that Uncle Albert wasn't on the guest list, since he was the head of this entire clan. "William, my boy, how nice to see you here today. Hyacinth, the witch, told me you were abroad and couldn't come," Albert said, extending his hand to shake mine. I can't say I've always liked this old eccentric. Megan's Uncle Albert is a lawyer by profession, and he always seemed too formal to me. In my youth, I had a natural dislike for people like that. That dislike has only grown stronger since my encounters with members of the legal profession. However, Megan hinted that this old eccentric had been on my side when my marriage fell apart. As a result, I was forced to quickly reconsider my attitude toward this man. "How are you, sir?" I replied, shaking his hand. "It's good to see you again." "Fine, fine," Albert smiled in response. I don't really understand what the phrase fine, fine, fine means or implies, but I remember that it was Uncle Albert's standard response to almost everything he was told, provided that everything was going the way the old fool wanted it to, which was the way he wanted it. At that moment, Tamsin appeared in front of me. She had obviously finished her duties in the reception area. In fact, completely forgetting her good manners, Tamsin rather rudely squeezed between Uncle Albert and me. I can only describe Tamsin's expression as one of complete disgust. "Not everyone is home. What are you after, some kind of handout or something? Or are you just trying to embarrass me?" Tamsin asked surprisingly quietly. I should probably mention that Tamsin's words, and the way she said them, were taken straight from the witch's repertoire. This wasn't my daughter talking to me. This was Tamsin, brainwashed by the witch since birth. This realization disappointed me, but I wasn't hurt by Tamsin's attitude toward me. It only confirmed that everything was as I had expected. I shifted my gaze from my daughter to Albert, then to Megan, who was standing next to me. "I told you this was a bad idea, Megan. I'd better go," I said and turned to leave. "No, wait, young man," Albert exclaimed, loud enough to attract the attention of almost everyone standing nearby, and authoritative enough to make me stop instantly. I turned around, wondering what the old man would say. "Tamsin, your father has traveled halfway around the world to be here with you on this special day. The least you can do is be polite to him." In fact, Albert's words were not true. I almost always spent the summer months in the UK. Most of my work on the ship and in the field of natural science took place in the waters of Antarctica, but nothing interesting happens there at this time of year. My daughter looked, well, I'm not sure. Perplexed, perhaps. She looked from me to my uncle, to everyone who was looking at us, and then back at me. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Father. Your sudden appearance took me by surprise. You've never shown any interest in my life." "And where did you get that idea, Tamsin?" Albert growled. "I must tell you, young lady, that your father has followed your development very closely. He has risked arrest on more than one occasion to be present at important events in your life. Isn't that right, young man?" "I'm sorry, sir," I began to reply, but Albert, unable to contain himself, continued speaking. "The award ceremonies at that damn expensive school your mother insisted on sending you to. I have it on good authority that your father attended every single one. He was also at your university graduation. Damn it, girl. You walked past your father to get your diploma without even noticing him. He knew who you were, but you didn't recognize him. Don't forget that your mother recognized him too, and that probably saved your father from a visit to the local magistrate." "I didn't know you were there, Uncle Albert," Tasneem ventured. "I wasn't there, Tamsin. At least, not as often as I would have liked. Your mother and I had our differences, as you know, but I have people who have been watching over you all these years, and they could have recognized your father. And none of them could have accidentally revealed his cover, right? With your mother around, your father's presence was technically illegal." I would advise you, Tamsin, to smile sweetly and forget about your imaginary differences with your father. I assure you or rather, your father's reputation in your eyes, has always been a victim of circumstances combined with your late mother's extremely poor judgment. Let's call a family truce on this special day, shall we? By this point, my daughter looked rather embarrassed. If you insist, Uncle, Tamsin agreed, then added, but I wonder why he came here today. Then Tamsin turned her back on me and disappeared into the crowd. Albert followed her and turned to me. William, I'm afraid your daughter has only heard one side of the story about her parents' divorce. It didn't help that you and Hyacinth didn't get along from the start. In her mother's eyes, I was never good enough for Shauna, sir, I replied. No one could ever be good enough for Hyacinth, William. I don't think even my brother fits that description in my sister-in-law's eyes. However, it seemed that Hyacinth had given up. She was there on the platform, apparently rearranging the chairs at the head table. When I looked closer, I saw that the witch, assisted by her perpetually clumsy husband, George, was indeed rearranging the tableware. As we watched, I noticed one of the photographers approaching them. The witch spoke briefly with him, and then, Hyacinth clearly pleased with her rearrangements, the small entourage left the platform. They're getting ready for group photos, Billy. We'd better leave, Megan whispered to me. No, you go, Megan. Tamsin won't be happy to see me there. Besides, without my monkey costume, I'll look completely out of place in the photos. It'll ruin the whole shoot. Billy? Don't argue, Megan. I was going to leave anyway. I knew it was a bad idea. After several protests, not only from Megan but also from her uncle Albert, they left me alone and went outside for the photo shoot. To my relief, almost all of the other guests also went out into the hotel garden to watch or participate. I took advantage of this opportunity to sneak onto the platform and fool around a bit. Of course, the witch sat me next to Tamsin's new husband. But given my daughter's behavior and the fact that I had never met this young man before, I decided it was asking for trouble. Besides, Uncle Albert and his wife were sitting at the end of the table, apparently my only open allies. So I sat Tamsin's grandfather in that seat. As I suspected, he had planned to sit there all along. Then I placed my card, hastily scribbled, next to Megan's card at the end of the table. I decided it would be safer that way. When she returned from the photo shoot, Megan briefly reverted to spoiled child mode. I hadn't seen her like that in a long time and thought it was funny. I decided it was because I had refused to participate in the photo shoot. Well, if you're going to act like that, I'm going to the bar, was all I could say to put an end to Megan's feigned protest. Just try it, and Megan replied. And what will you do, Megan? I asked. I don't know. Maybe I'll kiss you. I've always wanted to do that, but I never had the courage. I always knew that Shauna's younger sister had a crush on me, but I was surprised to hear that Megan still had feelings for me. My God, Megan, I thought you had outgrown silly teenage crushes long ago. Yes, I've grown up. I even found the one I thought was the man of my dreams. But I soon discovered that all that glitters is not gold, and that you don't always get what you see. It was only after I divorced that jerk that I realized what my sister had so easily discarded. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Megan. Okay, confused man. You're safe. She smiled. Come on. It looks like they're sitting down at the table. The top table was incredibly long, and Megan and her guest were initially seated lower down the hierarchy. Although the witch had rearranged everything, I, to the old witch's complete bewilderment, put everything back where it was. I found it very amusing. The witch seemed to accept my rearrangements without protest, but she shot me a nasty look. Albert sat down next to Megan. I thought Hyacinth, he began when we had taken our seats. I thought her original plan would be more diplomatic, sir, I interrupted him. With a capital letter, I always knew Hyacinth was wrong about you, my boy. Anyway, drop the formalities, please. I'm Bertie to the family. Albert monopolized me in conversation for almost the entire meal, paying little attention to anyone else around him, including his wife, except for Megan, who was sitting between us. He spent most of the meal asking me leading questions about my travels. I almost felt like I was on the witness stand. Well, he was a first-rate lawyer, accustomed to cross-examination. Well, let's see how they handle this, shall we? Albert commented, leaning back in his chair when the host asked everyone to be quiet for the official toasts. Tamsin's grandfather, who had arranged and probably paid for the party, stood up and gave a short welcome speech. And then the old man caught me off guard by inviting the father of the bride to say a few words and propose a toast to the happy couple. Judging by the expressions on Witch and Tamsin's faces, his suggestion was not part of the overall plan and had not been approved. And it certainly did not meet with universal approval. As I said, the old fool caught me completely off guard and totally unprepared. So I had to quickly gather my wits and act on instinct. I really don't remember much of what I said that day. I think I started by mumbling something about the unfortunate circumstances or something like that. But then I started talking about Tamsin, inserting practically every funny incident from her life that I knew into my speech. In any case, the speech must have been pretty good, and, I assume, prepared in advance, because I was shocked when the entire room erupted in laughter. Perhaps they were laughing at me because I had made a complete fool of myself. But even the witch's face broke into a smile at some point during my musings. Then, remembering that I had broken the magical 7-minute rule, yes, I was watching the clock, a minute had never moved so slowly, I proposed a toast to my new brother-in-law and his lovely bride, and then passed the ball to the groom. That was great, Billy. How long did you work on that speech? Megan asked as I sank back into my seat. Did it sound okay? I asked, not believing I'd pulled it off. Excellent, 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 my boy, Albert repeated. With a turn of phrase like that, you could make a fortune giving after-dinner speeches. Looking at the stocky Albert, I realized he knew what he was talking about when it came to after-dinner speeches, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I don't know exactly what happened after that, but I do know that what seemed like an endless circle of people jumped up and delivered surprisingly long and often ridiculous speeches. There were also toasts to every Tom, Dick, and Harry imaginable, including the Queen. I don't quite understand how she fit into this picture. Perhaps someone was trying to end the endless cycle of banal speeches. I noticed that none of the speakers could compare to my speech. Come here, boy. I've picked out and reserved a little corner for you, Albert said when people finally began to leave the dining room. It was at that moment that I began to suspect that Megan and her uncle Albert had planned my day in advance. Perhaps it was just a rough outline, but they both clearly knew what they were doing and seemed to be working together. Uncle Albert's wife hardly spoke to me, but every time our eyes met, she smiled sweetly. Megan took my right hand firmly again, led me into the next room, and sat me down at a table by the bar. Strange for a wedding's reception, the table was in a separate small room, similar to the VIP rooms sometimes found in expensive nightclubs. I had always found such places pretentious and felt out of place there. A young woman, who appeared to be Albert's personal waitress, quickly approached us and took our drink orders. I noticed that almost all the other guests were standing in line at the bar to order drinks. Only a few managed to catch a glimpse of the young woman as they tried to place their orders. I also noticed that there was a similar partition at the far end of the room, but it was still empty. Later, I noticed that the witch, her husband, and the groom's parents would periodically go there. Shortly after we were served our first round of drinks, Sir Albert Stone began the ceremony. Numerous young members of the Stone clan, some of whom I had met at my wedding many years ago, arrived and introduced their mostly charming, but sometimes repulsive, offspring to Uncle Albert. Then, after carefully raising their hats to the head of the family, they disappeared into the crowd. This pointless pantomime bored me to tears and went on for about an hour. All the while, Albert did nothing but repeat his favorite phrase. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Sometimes he even added a third, excellent, to sound more convincing. To be honest, if it hadn't been so ridiculous, it might have been funny. I tried to ignore the pantomime and would probably have backed away if Megan hadn't clutched my arm with all her strength. Unfortunately, Albert decided to make sure that all the guests remembered, and in some cases learned, that I was Tamsin's biological father. I think Albert wanted to let anyone who thought otherwise know that he had decided to strip me of my former status as the black sheep of the family. Whenever I tried to ignore what was going on around me by talking to Megan, Albert introduced me to another member of the family, whether I knew them or not. There was one brief interlude when her new husband swept Tamsin across the dance floor. No one asked me to dance at that moment, which in a way was very convenient because I'm not very fond of old formalities, especially when my partner and I are the center of attention. I believe that's the last of them, Albert said with relief in his voice as the last small family group left our enclave. Now, my boy, I think we better get down to serious business. We can't allow your daughter to treat her father the way she used to. Damn, that was bold of her. It would have been nice if you had been there to make her get on her knees and give her a good spanking a few years ago. She needed it. Hell, Her mother needs it too. George has always been too soft on Shona. And then there's little Megan. Oh, hi, Uncle Albert, Megan muttered. Oh, you weren't so bad, Megan, but you have to admit that you were a nasty child sometimes. Sometimes you made your parents dance and sing. I was never as bad as Shona, Uncle. No, I agree with you, Megan. But I'm sure if William had sat Shona on his lap and spanked her when she first took a selfie, everyone's life would have been a lot easier, including his own. Knowing Shona, I would have spent most of that time behind bars, Albert, I interjected. Yes, you're right, William. That's probably how it would have been. Shona was an independent person and sometimes showed a clear lack of common sense and conscience. Sometimes? Megan asked. Yes, but too often, Albert agreed. Anyway, young man, it's time to mend your relationship with your daughter. Albert waved his hand dismissively, and our waitress appeared. He whispered something to her that I couldn't hear, and she disappeared again. A few minutes later, Albert suddenly stood up and placed our order. Come on, you two. We can't do this in front of the whole world and his wife. It might be indecent. The large man headed for the main lobby. The crowd on the dance floor magically parted before him. Megan, still clutching my right hand tightly, led me after him. I think I already mentioned that this day seemed pre-planned. That feeling grew stronger when Albert led me into another room, much smaller and almost empty. I found it strange that the young man guarding the hall, he had removed the rope blocking the entrance when we approached, was the same hotel employee I had given a few shillings to get into the gallery. The room was furnished more like a lounge bar than a hall, but without the bar itself. Instead, there were many large sofas, and on one of them in the corner sat 3 people, 2 men and a woman. For some reason, they looked out of place, and I realized that they were not part of the wedding party. For one thing, they weren't wearing white carnations, and I had even managed to steal one before the ceremony began. The woman. At first glance, I took her for one of the hotel staff. She looked like a very efficient and damn attractive young manager. The 2 men were of a completely different breed. They were well-dressed, but without excess, and one of them seemed disturbingly familiar to me. I thought I had seen him before and maybe even talked to him, but I couldn't remember where or when. The second guy was completely unknown to me, as was the young woman. Ignoring the 3 uninvited guests, Albert headed for a circular group of sofas. No sooner had he taken his seat and indicated where Megan and I should sit than a waitress appeared with a tray laden with new alcoholic drinks. Uncle Albert. Don't ask me why I decided to refer to him as Uncle Albert. He's not my uncle, but in this case it seemed appropriate. If you don't loosen your grip, I'll be drunk as a pig by the end of the evening. William, drunk people fall into several basic categories. Aggressive argumenters or lechers. Boring, talkative drunks. Sleepy drunks and more pleasant, cheerful drunks. I know you usually fall into the last category, Albert replied in an authoritative tone with a disconcerting smile on his face. I had to admit that Albert had accurately described my behavior when I was under the influence of alcohol. I no longer drink to excess, never. My wife would not approve. But I was very curious as to how he could know this. We don't move in the same circles or anything like that. Hell, I'd only seen the man 4 or 5 times in my life. You seem to know a lot about me, sir. Of course, young man. After everything that's happened, I feel it's my duty to look out for you. If I can't do anything else, at least I can make sure you don't get into trouble. I don't understand, sir. Enough of that, William. I'm on your side. I've always been on your side. Hasn't Megan assured you of that? I must have nodded or something because he continued. All right. Hang in there a little longer, young man, and everything will become clear to you. I hope so. I also hope that you will understand my position and find it in your heart to forgive me for not taking action sooner. Now you've got me completely confused, Bertie. My reply brought a smile to the old man's face, but it didn't last long. His gaze shifted to the other end of the room. Following his gaze, I saw Witch and George enter the living room. They were quickly followed by Tamsin and her husband. All 4 were invited to sit on the adjacent sofas opposite us. Albert's gaze returned to the entrance to the living room. It was obvious that he was expecting someone else to join us. What is all this, Bertie? Why did you call us here? We have guests, asked Witch. Calm down, Hyacinth. Without your interference, I'm sure none of this would have happened. Shauna was a frivolous girl who made an honest mistake, which she was ready to admit until you talked her out of it. I don't know what you're talking about, the witch began to shout, but her husband silenced her. Shut up, Hyacinth. Bertie is absolutely right, George snapped. My God, worms, I thought to myself. I couldn't even imagine such a thing. At that moment, a man in a black suit and a dog collar entered the living room. I recognized him as another prominent member of the Stone clan. He was a Roman Catholic priest named Father Connor, clearly of Irish descent. However, I was never able to determine his place in the Stone family tree. As far as I knew, all the other members of the Stone clan were strict Catholics. Be that as it may, this man had always been kind to me on the rare occasions when we met. I should add that regardless of whether Father Connor professed a different faith, he held the same patriarchal position in the family clan as Sir Albert Stone. However, when the guests gathered in the main hall, I saw Father Connor carefully circle all the members of the family several times. Albert stood up to greet Father Connor, and then the priest turned to me and shook my hand. I jumped up as soon as Albert stood up. "I'm glad you decided to come today, William. You did a fine job with your speech, young man. Your daughter must have been surprised to learn that you know her life story so well." As he said this, Father Connor glanced quickly at Tamsin. She looked a little embarrassed. "Thank you, Father. I hope you're well. Everything is as God would have it, William. And you, Megan, were you avoiding me today?" The kind priest turned his attention elsewhere. I waited patiently for him to finish with Megan, and we all sat down at the table again. Uncle Albert cleared his throat loudly, as if to say, "Now let's get down to business." But Father Connor spoke first. "Bertie, you do understand that confession is confidential, don't you?" "Of course, Joe," Albert replied. "Until recently, my actions were just as restricted. However, I think I may be able to find a way out of our predicament." "Very well. The important thing is that everyone understands that I cannot reveal anything that has been said to me in confidence," Father Connor repeated. Albert looked at Tamsin kindly. "Tamsin, would you do me a favor? I want you to imagine that we are in a courtroom and you are giving testimony. You're under oath if you understand me." "Yes, Uncle Bertie, but I don't—" Tamsin began to reply. "I don't expect you to understand, Tamsin. Not yet. I hope it will all become clear to you soon. If not, then this whole charade will be a waste of time. I just want you to answer my questions as fully and honestly as you can under the circumstances. Everything I ask you to say will be put into words, so it won't hold up in court." Are you kidding?" "Of course I'm kidding, Uncle Bertie. Now I want you to tell us everything you know about your parents' divorce." "Wait, Bertie," I tried to interject. "Shut up, Billy, this is my turn," Albert threatened me. To be honest, I was quite stunned by this rebuke. Not so much because of Albert's sharp remark, more because he addressed me as Billy. "Now, Tamsin, be a good girl," Albert continued. "Albert, she was just a little girl then." "You're asking too much of Tamsin," exclaimed the witch. "You know, you're probably right, Hyacinth," Albert agreed. "Why don't you tell us the story? As I recall, you were there and old enough to understand what was going on. I'm sure you've repeated the story so many times over the years that you know it by heart." "I don't think I can," replied the witch. For the first time, I noticed that she was unsure of herself and even looked embarrassed. "Oh, but I'm sure you can, Hyacinth. Your speeches against William have been part of our party for years." Obviously, Albert's attacks on her grandmother had struck a chord with Tamsin. She sat up straight. "I'll tell it," Tamsin began, but Albert stopped her. Albert seemed adamant that the witch tell the story. I don't understand why, but I have to assume that Albert's original request to Tamsin to tell the story was some kind of legal maneuver designed to achieve I don't know what. How legal minds work often remains a mystery to us mere mortals. In the end, the witch relented, though she kept her eyes averted from me the entire time she spoke. I won't repeat Hyacinth's words. Some of her stories were completely out of chronological order, and even more had no connection to the real events of the time, mother and daughter. Nevertheless, I will try to retell the main points of the story as the witch told it that day. The witch's tirade. Shona and William had been in America for several months working on a film. It was Shona's first feature film, and William was working as a camera assistant or something like that. Larry Parker, the film's director, was very impressed with Shona's acting skills and told me that she would soon be a big star. We thought everything was going very well. When she called home, Shona was very excited about her big break in the film. However, when her 1.5-year-old daughter Tamsin was with her, things got a little more complicated. Shona told us that several girls on set were very supportive and looked after Tamsin while she was filming. But one night, everything changed. We received a call saying that William had left and was drunk and unconscious. He returned to the house where he and Shauna lived, where she was rehearsing her lines for the next day's shoot with Larry's help. For some inexplicable reason, William flew into a rage and attacked Shauna and poor Larry, breaking the leg of a chair. Fortunately, Larry managed to overpower William and knock him out before he could kill them both. As far as I understand, William was completely out of his mind. However, Larry was unable to prevent William from breaking Shauna's cheekbone. Poor Larry also had a rough time because William gave him a very bad black eye. The police, of course, charged William with assault, but I took Tamsin back to the UK before the case went to court. I know he was sent to prison, but I don't know for how long. And of course, after serving his sentence, he was deported back to the UK. After William beat her, Shauna divorced him. What else could the poor girl do? No woman should have to put up with that kind of treatment from her husband. Shauna was supposed to get another, much bigger role in a movie that was going to be filmed in Hollywood. Larry had arranged it all. But her face never healed before filming began and she missed out on the opportunity. William's madness that night robbed Shauna of the chance to become the successful actress she could have been. The poor girl was so afraid of what William would do when he returned to the country that we were forced to obtain a restraining order against him. As we all know, there have been several court cases over the years, but from that day to this, we haven't seen William outside the courtroom. The witch, looking quite pleased with herself, leaned back on the sofa, signaling that the story was over. But I noticed that she was still not looking me in the eye. I was sure she couldn't do it because she knew very well that the story she had just told was neither complete nor an accurate picture of what had happened in the US that weekend. I didn't sit silently and listen to the witch's dialogue as Albert wanted. Several times I had to object, add, or correct details that the witch either ignored or didn't know. Megan, however, still holding tightly to my right hand, seemed to sense every time I was about to lose my patience. She squeezed my hand, and almost at the same moment, apparently they were communicating somehow, her Uncle Albert signaled me to be quiet. "You seem to be a very loud drunk, William," Albert remarked. Albert remarked, "I find that very hard to believe. It's also rather strange that you've managed to stay out of jail. It must be 22 years now." I nodded in agreement with Albert's assessment. "It's rather strange that I haven't received any reports that you lose control of your emotions when under the influence of alcohol. For those who don't know, William has been under the supervision of several assistants for many years. And lately, William has been, well, let's be honest, behaving a little aggressively. Be that as it may, I have a feeling that William will interpret events a little differently. Why don't you enlighten us, William, as to what you think about this ill-fated weekend?" I let go of Megan and shifted slightly in my chair. I didn't want her to interrupt me or interfere with my thoughts. What's more, without Megan's comforting presence nearby, I suddenly felt exposed. Then I looked straight at Tamsin, because she was the one I needed to understand. "What your grandmother said was untrue from the start. A friend asked me to be the second cameraman on a movie shoot. It was supposed to be an action movie set in the mountains. The second camera crew was supposed to shoot all the long shots, often with stunt doubles instead of the main actors. That had always been my forte, long shots and working with the phone. They only paid for Shauna's flight to the US because I refused to go without her. I figured it would be a nice free vacation for Shauna. The crew rented some kind of winter resort. They probably got it cheap since it was off-season. I never thought for a minute that they would ask Shauna to replace an actor who broke his leg on the first day of shooting. Of course, they had to get a little creative to turn a small role into a female character. Shauna had already appeared in several TV commercials, so she was in the right place at the right time. It was cheaper to use her than to find and fly in another actor. Oh, they cut the skiing scene. Once bitten, twice shy, if you know what I mean. I had absolutely no idea what was going on behind my back, although I knew that Larry Parker was probably flirting with some naive girl on set. That's Larry. He was known in the industry for his affairs. Besides, I considered Parker a friend and was mistaken in thinking that friends don't seduce other friends' wives. On Friday, we finished shooting on location. Everything else had to be shot in the studio. Shauna's character wasn't needed for the shoot. It was a very small role. Anyway, on Friday afternoon, the rest of the crew and I had to pack up all the equipment so it could be returned to the rental company. All the technical equipment is rented as needed. Overall, the packing went better than planned, and we packed everything up much faster than I expected. I returned to the cottage that Shauna and I shared around 5:30. I didn't think I would be back there before 10 o'clock that evening. But when I arrived, there was no one there. No loving wife, no sleeping child. All I found was a note. This note. I took out my wallet and handed Tamsin the crumpled piece of paper. But Albert snatched it out of my hands. He slowly and carefully unfolded the rest of the document. Then he read aloud the words scribbled on it. Billy, I'm leaving with Larry. He loves me and will make me a big Hollywood star. Please don't follow us and don't make a scene. Shona. Short and to the point, Albert commented. Go on, William, but I think we all know where this is going. The filming on location is finished, you say? Yes, sir, it's finished, I replied. So it turns out that Shona is rehearsing her lines for the next day, right? But go on, boy. Let's get to the interesting part. You only have his word, exclaimed the witch. How do you know he's not lying? Quite right, Hyacinth, agreed Albert. Let's check a few facts. Albert looked at the three strangers. Reginald, would you be so kind? The man I didn't know stood up and walked over to us carrying a briefcase. Sir, he said to Albert as soon as he was close enough. Do you have copies of the script for this movie? Reginald didn't answer. He took a folder out of his briefcase and handed it to Albert. Albert didn't even bother to open the folder, but simply threw it onto the coffee table surrounded by sofas. If anyone wants to dispute William's story, they will find that it is corroborated by the contents of this folder. Please continue, William. I was taken aback for a few seconds, interrupting the flow of my thoughts. I had to literally calm myself down before I could continue. When I found that note, I was terrified and in a state of apoplexy. Yes, and I had a couple of drinks to calm my nerves. But then I realized I shouldn't go back to camp tonight. What's more, I remembered seeing Larry's car parked near his cabin when we returned to camp. Then it dawned on me that Shona and Larry might have miscalculated. They thought they would have time to leave before I found the note. I have no idea what to do in this situation. All I know is that I wanted to at least hear from Shauna to find out what game she was playing. I was sure Parker would dump Shauna as soon as he found another stupid slut. I just couldn't believe that Shauna had forgotten everything I told her about the way that man behaved. I wasn't stupid enough to introduce my wife to Parker without preparing her first. And when that sleazy guy turned on the charm, even the blood-sucking birds flew out of the trees to him. Anyway, I found them in the kitchen of Larry's cabin. I wasn't interested in Parker. I could have dealt with him any time. He wouldn't have been able to hide from me for long and stay in the industry, if you know what I mean. I wanted Shauna to explain why she didn't take my warning seriously. However, Larry Parker misjudged my intentions, perhaps because he had been pursued by other spouses in the past. In any case, to be honest, he charged at me like a bull in a china shop. I just jumped aside, and Parker flew past me and crashed into the back door, breaking the glass. For a moment, I thought Parker was trying to escape. Later in court, it was claimed that I broke the glass by climbing into the cab. The fact that the shards were lying on the floor outside and I had no cuts on my hand, unlike Larry, was apparently ignored. Of course, it didn't help that I remembered little about the day I first regained consciousness and remembered nothing for several years. But now I remember everything in minute detail. I don't know how to describe Larry Parker's fighting technique because it doesn't fit into any category I know. In any case, as soon as he recovered from the collision with the door, he lunged at me again. I dodged again, but managed to hit him once as he flew past me. I thought that would cool his ardor a little or something like that. Big mistake. My punch changed the direction of his attack. Parker collided with Shauna, and they fell to the floor. To my surprise, Shauna was still sitting on the chair next to the bar. Apparently, it was the same chair that had broken under the impact. I really thought Parker was out of the game, and Shauna didn't look too smart. So I pulled Parker away from her and helped Shauna to her feet. I remember Shauna looking me in the eyes. She was clearly in shock. And then the damn lights went out. When I woke up 4 days later, I was strapped to a hospital bed. I couldn't remember anything about that day or the days leading up to it. I should add that my memories came back very slowly over the months and years that followed. Anyway, Tamsin, those are my memories of that fateful day. Everything that has happened since then has been completely beyond my control. I have no idea who or what hit me, and I came to the conclusion that it was Larry Parker's head that broke your mother's cheekbone when he crashed into her. I assume that he hit me on the head, breaking my skull with his foot from the broken chair that Shauna was sitting on. Why these two decided to accuse me of fighting, I have no idea. And since your mother, with the help of her lawyers, made sure I couldn't get close enough to her to ask her about it, I learned that Larry Parker was found dead, with gunshot wounds, in a motel room in Los Angeles while I was still enjoying the hospitality of the American justice system, so I couldn't ask him about it? I strongly suspect that Parker decided to sleep with the wrong wife. Larry Parker apparently discovered that some Yankees can be extremely jealous and quite vindictive. They can also be very energetic in their use of firearms. I leaned back on the sofa, unable to add anything else without sounding too vindictive toward my daughter's mother. Megan grabbed my right hand again and kissed me unexpectedly on the cheek. Tamsin sat silently, staring at me. It seemed as if she was trying to read my mind. Suddenly, she looked at Albert. "You know what really happened, don't you, Uncle Albert? Mom told you, didn't she?" Then Tamsin instantly turned her piercing gaze to Connor's father. "She told you too." "She did, my child. But like your Uncle Albert, we were bound hand and foot," Connor's father replied. "We cannot disclose what was told to us in the strictest confidence. In my case, it's a confession in Albert's case." "Attorney-client privilege," added Tamsin's new husband. It was then that I realized for the first time that this man was speaking American. His parents were clearly not American. In the British legal system, we use a different term, young man. But essentially, it amounts to the same restriction, Albert assured him. "Tamsin, I'm sure your mother wouldn't lie to you." The witch had made up her mind. Tamsin jumped to her feet and shot her grandmother a hostile glance. She turned to face her grandmother directly. "So am I, Grandma. But my mother never explained to me what happened back then. Everything I know I learned from others. Whenever I asked my mother about it, she always changed the subject or walked away." Suddenly, Tamsin spun on her heels, crossed the room to where the three strangers were sitting, and turned to the man who looked familiar to her. "I know you, don't I?" she asked. "Yes, young lady, you may recognize me," the man replied. "Uncle Albert hinted that someone was following me, and I remember seeing you several times at my school. I'm also sure I saw you several times in Bristol when I was at university." "That's possible, miss," the man agreed. "So, considering that my uncle hinted that someone is following my father, and I know that Reginald and Shirley work in my Uncle Albert's London office, I suspect that you are the one who has been following my father, just as you have been following me. Am I right?" "Yes, miss, you are correct," the man replied. "So who are you, a private investigator?" "I'm a former police officer, miss. The one your uncle turns to when he needs my special services." Tamsin turned, looked me straight in the eye, and smiled. Then she turned back to the man. "I assume you've studied the events of that evening very carefully, even in the past." The man nodded to confirm that he had. "Then tell me, do you consider my father to be an honest man? He didn't deceive us today?" "Not to my knowledge, miss," the man replied. "Thank you, officer. I'm sorry you didn't give me your name." "Retired Sergeant White, miss. My friends call me Yeoman." "Thank you, Yeoman. I don't understand why Uncle Bertie didn't send you to tell me the truth." "I'm only doing what I'm told, miss." "Could you shed any light on why my Uncle Albert kept silent for so long, Mel?" "I can only speculate, miss, but I believe your uncle was protecting someone from being accused of perjury." "But why would she perjure herself?" "That I cannot tell you, miss. But I can tell you that a film producer cannot promote a young actress if he is in prison for grievous bodily harm, or whatever it's called in America." "Suddenly it all makes sense," exclaimed Tamsin. "How long have you known your father?" she asked, turning to me. "No, Tamsin, but I suspected as much," I replied. "I don't know how seriously your mother was injured that night, but from the beginning, I wasn't sure she remembered the events as clearly as she claimed in court. Perhaps Shauna repeated to the police the story Parker told her." Tamsin turned back to Petty. "May I invite you and your assistants to be my husbands and guests of honor for the rest of the evening?" she asked. All three thanked Tamsin, and she literally pushed them into the main hall. Then she slowly walked across the room toward us, looking me straight in the eye. "Tamsin, the witch began, coming closer. "Please don't talk to me right now, Grandma. I'm too angry and I might say something I'll regret. Grandpa, please see your wife out and take care of the guests. Paul and I will be leaving soon." Without a word, George lifted the witch to her feet and led her outside. Tamsin went over and hugged Connor's father, then Uncle Albert. She didn't speak to them, just hugged them. Then she turned to Megan and me. "Can I take you away from my father for a moment, Aunt Megan? I'd like to talk to him alone." Then she turned to her husband. "Paul, Aunt Megan loves to dance." The boy understood, as did Megan. As soon as they left the main hall, Tamsin and I, Tamsin leading me, as Megan had done all day, headed for the hotel garden. Tamsin was silent for a long time, just squeezing my left hand tightly. But finally she asked, how can I begin to apologize to you, Dad? Slightly embarrassed, I asked. For what, sweetheart? She stopped, and I turned to her. Well, probably for the way I talked to you earlier. But I feel like I need to apologize to you for a lot of things. If I could only understand what exactly, I would feel so much happier. The truth is, baby, you're the one who needs to apologize. We're both victims. All we need to do now is make up for lost time, I replied. You don't look very angry, Dad. It took me many years to realize that anger doesn't make life better, Tamsin. What it can do is get you into serious trouble. Believe me, I've been there. But Grandma, your grandmother never liked me, Tamsin, ever since your mother and I started dating. But why? What did you do to upset her so much? I was born into a family that your grandmother considers wrong, Tamsin, and I courted her daughter. Snobbery, plain and simple. I'll like having my father watching over me? I hope so, sweetheart. But I won't be able to be around all the time, as most of my work is in Antarctica. I'm there most of the year. For some reason, I don't think my Aunt Megan will like that. I think she's in love with you. What happened to her husband? I thought she was married, I asked. Okay, that's not true. Megan hinted that she was married. I just wanted to know a little bit of history without asking her. Tamsin smirked. Oh, right. He was a handsome guy, but too quick with his fists? What do you mean? They got into a fight over something and he hit Megan. Oh my gosh, what did she do? Dad, remember how Aunt Megan told you about how she was bullied at school? Yes, that's right. I took her to the gym and taught her how to defend herself. Megan's ex-husband got a taste of your training. He was taken away in an ambulance. Damn, is Megan hurt? Uncle Bertie is handling the case. Her ex got 2 years probation. That's good. I wouldn't want to be the cause of trouble in Megan's life. She was a good girl. Do you love my Aunt Megan, Dad? I can tell she cares about you. I've always loved Megan, Tamsin. But she was your mother's younger sister, who was my fiancée and then my wife, remember? Her younger sister. In circumstances like that, you have to control your emotions. You said that just like Uncle Bertie, Dad. Damn it, Dad, I said it. And it wasn't as hard as I thought. From now on, you're my dad, okay? I don't mind, kid. Tamsin hugged me around the neck, pulled me close, and kissed me on the cheek. I'll love hearing you call me kid every time you say it, Dad. But like I said, or tried to say, my mom died, and so did my dad and Aunt Megan. Well, I always loved Aunt Megan. Can I count on your approval, Tamsin? I asked. Of course, Dad, you can. Don't jump to conclusions, Tamsin. Megan is remembering her older brother's character, not her lover's. The two men aren't necessarily interchangeable. Uncle Bertie has spoken again. Let's go back inside. I want to show off my dad to all my friends. What about your new husband? Paul left me alone on a cruise ship for 2 weeks. He has nothing to complain about. We returned to the house, and I was introduced to hundreds of young people. I didn't see Megan, who I had hoped would save me, but in the end, Bertie appeared next to me. Tamsin looked a little reluctant, but eventually agreed that I could go with Bertie. In fact, as I understood it, Bertie needed a cover to go outside and smoke a cigar. Apparently, Bertie's very quiet wife didn't approve of his smoking. We went out onto the terrace and Bertie lit a cigar. You understand that I would never make Shauna do this, William? He said. Bertie, I may be a fool, but I'm not that foolish. She was really special, wasn't she? Yes, she was. And she was very afraid of going to prison, especially in the U.S. Interesting. They would have put her in jail for perjury. She must have hit her head pretty hard to break her cheekbone like that. In an English court, I doubt it. But in an American court, I can't imagine it. Hyacinth scared Shauna that she would be sent to prison anyway. And Shauna was a witness in your trial. I read the transcript, William. It was small-town justice. And it left a lot to be desired. A decent appeal wouldn't hurt you. Bertie, by the time I figured it all out, I was going to be released anyway. An appeal would have pushed Shauna in the opposite direction, especially with Larry Parker dead. You know better than anyone how some legal bigwigs see things when they find out they've been cheated. Someone has to pay for this. You're a sentimental fool, William. Listen to who's talking, I replied. Albert took one last drag on his cigar and crushed it against the balustrade. Don't say that, Mem Sahib, William, or they'll castrate me. Now we'd better get back to the house before Megan throws another tantrum. That girl has feelings for you, young man. I noticed, Bertie, I noticed. Fine, 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 he replied when we returned to the banquet hall. It was only when Tamsin and Paul disappeared into the bridal suite that I realized I didn't have a reservation for the night. The original plan was to return to the rented cottage on the south coast that I called home. Don't worry, I have a spare bed in my room. You can sleep there. Megan, aren't you in a hurry? You know we have to hurry. Hey, take it easy, handsome. I've seen you in action before, and I want it to be the same this time. What do you mean, seen me in action? You said it yourself, Billy. I'm particularly good at sneaking around, and I've managed to sneak up on people and watch them more than once. Your little hideout in the woods wasn't as secret as you and Sean thought. Damn, you're a pervert, Megan. You want to see perverted, I'll show you perverted. Come to my room. I woke up to the feeling of an unfamiliar weight on my chest. Opening my eyes and looking down at my chest, I saw Megan's smiling face. Are you awake yet? She asked. Damn, girl, you don't know how to do anything halfway, do you? I only had one night, Billy. I had to make sure you understood what you were offering. On a permanent basis. Is that a proposal, Megan? I asked. Of course, my love, and I can quickly call Father Connor to make it official if you'd like. Father Connor is Catholic, Megan, and we're both Anglican, aren't we? Details, details, details. I thought you were a sailor, Billy. Yes, but what? Does that have to do with the price of apples? In a storm, any port is a good port, lover. I'd marry a rabbi if you asked me to. Besides, I have this. Megan handed me an envelope. And please tell me what's in that envelope, Megan. 2 tickets for a cruise. The same luxurious cabin my old uncle paid for. And it just so happens that it's the same cruise that a certain person's daughter and her new husband are going on for their honeymoon. It's great, you can see your daughter during the day and we can have sex every night for a whole week. Megan, when did you and good old Bertie start planning this Shanghai adventure or whatever you call it? I'll be completely honest with you. Bertie came up with the basic plan after Shauna's funeral. Of course, my Uncle Bertie didn't expect me to seduce you. That was entirely my idea, and it fell into the desirable outcomes category. So, how do you like the cruise? I looked down again and saw the sad expression on Megan's face. I think I'll just enjoy the vacation, dear. However, we won't have time to get a marriage license before the ship leaves. Don't worry, Billy. I checked. It's registered in Bermuda. What do you mean, fact? You'll find out soon enough, honey. You'll find out. Now, how about another walk on the deck before breakfast? She smiled. I smiled back at Megan. That day, we only had time for breakfast. Life goes on. C'est la vie épilogue. Megan and I didn't get married on the ship. Although we weren't against it, Bertie's wife didn't want us to. For such a seemingly modest elderly lady, Beatrice could be very bossy when she wanted to be. Not surprising, considering who she had been married to since time immemorial. Beatrice arranged our wedding. I'm sure Bertie paid for everything himself. Of course, it wasn't as lavish as Tamsin's, but neither Megan nor I wanted it to be. To be honest, we both would have preferred a quiet ceremony on the ship with just Tamsin and Paul. The witch didn't come to our wedding, but Megan's father gave her away. He even said, "This is becoming a habit, William," as he handed me his daughter's hand. Bertie spent the whole day with a big smile on his face. During his speech, he even claimed that he was the one who brought the bride and groom together, which, I suppose, was largely true, although I'm sure that Megan's determination would have brought us together in the end, even if I hadn't snuck into Tamsin's wedding. When my wife knows what she wants, she is capable of moving mountains to get it. She can easily subdue Uncle Bertie, and that's not so difficult. Her only problem is that Megan thinks too much. For example, should we get up or stay on the terrace a little longer? I assure you this greatly interferes with my work schedule, and it's not very good for my back. I'm not as young as I used to be. And it doesn't matter that my wife wants to believe otherwise. Yes, but I don't work in the Southern Seas anymore. Bertie knew someone whose brother is a producer, or something like that, in the BBC's wildlife department. I suddenly discovered that Megan's phone was flooded with offers to film wildlife, mostly in the UK, and all quite lucrative. In short, just what I needed. Megan and I decided that children weren't an issue. We figure we have enough on our hands with Tamsin's twins. That's if she and Paul aren't playing soccer. We settled into a cozy little bungalow around the corner from Paul and Tamsin's house. It was a convenient distance for pushing a stroller. Bertie drove Paul and me to the local golf club. Sunday mornings with the four of us became a regular occurrence. The fourth member of the club? George, of course. Now that he and the witch are no longer husband and wife, he has been elevated or reinstated to the position of second grandfather in my daughter's eyes. Bertie, of course, has priority. Well, he is the head of the family. What did you expect? Life goes on. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next video.